The controversy between Arsenal legend George Armstrong and manager Terry Neill is one of the club's most uncomfortable internal battles. So before we dive in, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more deep football stories. This clash wasn't about trophies or tactics, but about respect, authority, and broken trust. Armstrong versus Neill became a symbol of how even club legends can fall victim to managerial power when relationships turn personal rather than professional. The breaking point reportedly came in December 1977, when George Armstrong missed a required Christmas appearance at White Hart Lane. What seemed like a minor issue quickly escalated, as Terry Neill viewed it as a serious breach of discipline. From Neill's perspective, no player, regardless of status, was bigger than the club, and Armstrong's absence was seen as open defiance. George Armstrong, however, felt deeply disrespected by the way the situation was handled. After years of loyal service and iconic performances for Arsenal, he believed he deserved understanding rather than punishment. To Armstrong, this wasn't about skipping an event, but about a manager failing to recognize the human side of a club legend who had already given everything. Terry Neill, on the other hand, was trying to assert control during a difficult managerial period. Arsenal were inconsistent, pressure was mounting, and Neill believed discipline was essential to maintaining order. In the Neill versus Armstrong conflict, the manager chose authority over sentiment, a decision that would ultimately backfire in the court of public opinion. As tensions grew, Armstrong found himself increasingly isolated from the squad. What made the situation worse was the silence from the club hierarchy, who failed to step in and mediate. The lack of support signaled that the manager's word carried more weight than a player's legacy. No matter how historic that legacy was, the fallout was painful for Arsenal fans, many of whom sided with Armstrong. Supporters saw him as a symbol of loyalty and humility, while Neill was viewed as cold and inflexible. This wasn't just Armstrong versus Neill anymore. It became tradition versus authority, emotion versus control, and fans versus the modern managerial mindset. In the end, George Armstrong left under a cloud that never should have existed. The controversy remains a reminder that football isn't only won on the pitch, but also lost behind closed doors. Armstrong versus Terry Neill stands as a lesson in how mishandled relationships can damage reputations, fracture clubs, and turn legends into casualties of power struggles. This disagreement ultimately marked the end of George Armstrong's long and devoted playing career at Arsenal. After 15 seasons of service, the relationship between club legend and manager had deteriorated beyond repair. What made the situation especially painful was that this was not a gradual decline, but a sudden rupture caused by one incident that spiraled out of control. Armstrong's exit felt abrupt, unfair, and deeply personal rather than purely football-related. At the center of the controversy was a mandatory club appearance scheduled around Christmas 1977. George Armstrong failed to attend the event, an action that immediately caught the attention of manager Terry Neill. In an era where discipline was rigidly enforced, Neill viewed attendance as non-negotiable. The absence was not treated as a misunderstanding but as a serious violation of club rules. Terry Neill's response was firm and uncompromising as manager. He believed that maintaining authority was essential, especially during a challenging period for the club. Despite their shared history as former teammates, Neill chose to act strictly as a disciplinarian. To him, allowing Armstrong leniency would undermine his control over the squad. For George Armstrong, the punishment felt humiliating. He had been one of Arsenal's most loyal servants, rarely injured, rarely controversial, and consistently professional. Missing one appearance, in his view, did not justify the severity of the reaction. The lack of private dialogue between player and manager only deepened the sense of betrayal. What hurt Armstrong most was not the discipline itself, but the absence of empathy. After years of sacrifice, he expected understanding rather than confrontation. The issue quickly shifted from a missed event to a breakdown in mutual respect. At that point, Armstrong no longer felt valued as a person, only judged as an asset. The fallout escalated rapidly, creating a permanent rift between Armstrong and Neill. Communication between the two reportedly became strained, if not completely severed. Once trust was lost, reconciliation seemed impossible. Arsenal's dressing room atmosphere suffered as a result, with players aware that even legends were not immune. Club officials failed to step in and defuse the situation. Instead of mediating, Arsenal's hierarchy allowed the conflict to reach a point of no return. This silence was interpreted by Armstrong as a lack of institutional support. It became clear that the manager's authority would not be questioned, even at the cost of losing a club icon. Soon after, the unthinkable happened. George Armstrong was transferred to Leicester City for a fee of just £15,000. For a player who held a then record number of appearances and defined an era, the transfer fee symbolized how abruptly his value had been diminished. The move shocked supporters who never imagined Armstrong leaving under such circumstances. For Arsenal fans, the transfer felt like a betrayal of tradition. Armstrong was not just a player, he was part of the club's identity. His departure exposed a growing tension between football's emotional heritage and the cold pragmatism of modern management. Supporters overwhelmingly sided with Armstrong. Adding complexity to the story were rumors suggesting Armstrong may have been facing financial difficulties at the time. Some speculated this contributed to tensions with the club and manager. However, most credible reports continue to cite the disciplinary issue as the primary cause. The financial angle remains unproven, and secondarily, what remains undeniable is that the conflict was mishandled. A simple conversation could have prevented years of resentment and an unwanted exit. Instead, pride, authority, and silence dictated the outcome. Armstrong's career at Arsenal ended not with a farewell, but with lingering bitterness. At Leicester City, Armstrong continued his career, but it was clear his heart remained at Arsenal. The move felt more like exile than opportunity. While he remained professional, the emotional scars from his departure never fully healed. His story became a cautionary tale for players and managers alike. Over time, Terry Neill's managerial legacy became increasingly scrutinized. While discipline is necessary, critics argue that Neill failed to balance authority with compassion. The Armstrong episode is often cited as an example of leadership that prioritized control over human connection. Years later, a form of reconciliation quietly took place. In 1990, George Armstrong returned to Arsenal as a reserve team coach under manager George Graham. The appointment signaled a symbolic healing, even if the past was never openly revealed. Armstrong once again walked the halls of the club he loved as a coach. Armstrong was respected and admired by young players. His humility, work ethic, and deep understanding of Arsenal's culture made him an ideal mentor. Unlike his playing exit, his coaching return was warmly embraced by fans and staff alike. George Armstrong held that role until his death in 2000, restoring his place within the Arsenal family. The club and its supporters never stopped adoring him. His legacy endured beyond controversy, beyond conflict, and beyond managerial decisions. Today, George Armstrong remains an Arsenal legend, remembered for loyalty, consistency, and quiet greatness. The controversy with Terry Neill serves as a reminder that football history is shaped not just by goals and trophies, but by relationships. Armstrong's story proves that legends may leave, but they are never forgotten. In the end, the story of George Armstrong and Terry Neill is less about a missed appearance and more about how fragile trust can be in football. One decision, handled without empathy, was enough to sever a relationship built over years. It reminds us that authority without understanding often creates lasting damage. George Armstrong's departure left a scar on Arsenal's identity. A player who symbolized loyalty and consistency deserved a farewell worthy of his service, not an abrupt exit clouded by conflict. For many fans, this moment marked a shift away from the values that once defined the club. Terry Neill's stance showed the harsh reality of football management. Discipline is necessary, but when applied without balance, it can alienate those who have given everything. The Armstrong episode remains a lesson in leadership, highlighting the cost of prioritizing control over compassion. What makes this story endure is Armstrong's dignity. He never publicly attacked the club or the manager, choosing silence over bitterness. That restraint only strengthened his legacy, proving that character often speaks louder than controversy. His return to Arsenal as a coach completed a quiet circle. While the past was never fully erased, it was softened by time, respect, and recognition. The fans' continued admiration showed where their loyalty truly lay. George Armstrong's name remains woven into Arsenal history, untouched by one painful chapter. Legends are defined not by how they leave, but by what they give, and Armstrong gave everything. His story stands as a reminder that loyalty should never be disposable. Ultimately, Armstrong versus Neill is a cautionary tale for modern football. Behind every decision are people, not just rules. And when football forgets that truth, even its greatest legends can be lost too soon.